Hello, today we're going to talk about the American Revolution and the changes it didn't make. So I guess today we'll just start by talking about that. After the American Revolution and during the American Revolution, even before the American Revolution, the British Americans were still the same. A lot of the things they were doing weren't changing. British Americans claimed land that wasn't theirs, spent a lot of time slaughtering natives, even sending their own people over into North America was killing them because the natives would see strange settlers and would slaughter their whole entire, communities basically. Slavery was another thing that happened in colonial America that really takes a turn for the worse, even after the revolution. When the settlers declared their independence in 1776, it claimed a land of equal people. It was supposed to be a great country. But the British drove out settlers, for an example, the French, and the French would have been really good for the Indians. But aside from that, the British drove out settlers. Slaves were still kept, natives were not at all equal to any other American, and women still had no rights. That would be my favorite talking point, but unfortunately today, I'm not going to make a feminist standpoint because that's just not what this video is about. The revolution was so minor compared to any other event in history that could have taken place, especially minor compared to the changes they could have made. The British Americans not only took advantage of natives and their kind ways, but they replaced no government officials, didn't even give poor white men the advantage in society. Not only did British Americans keep slaves and Native Americans in an inhumane way past the Revolutionary War and past the Declaration of Independence, the land was bloody and there was nothing you could do to take it away without replacing the people that were residing on the land, the people that were guilty of killing off these people, of and capturing these people, of basically taking away the basic rights of anybody who lives in any country. I mentioned earlier, poor white men didn't even have the rights that rich white men did, and most rich white men belonged to the government. So when they got this Declaration of Independence and they had their Revolutionary War, everything was supposed to change, but poor white men didn't have rights to vote. Women didn't have rights to vote. People of color didn't have rights to vote. Nothing really had changed. So the American Revolution didn't really bring any changes forth for the whole country as it was promised. Everybody wasn't equal. Women and people of color weren't equal with each other, but not only that, they weren't equal to men, or more specifically, the government. The government wanted control over everyone. So they issued laws and regulations that benefited them rather than the country as a whole. No promises were really kept toward Americans at the time that didn't have any status in life, and women didn't have a status in life, which was a tradition, and people of color, Indians, the Africans, they didn't have the power that rich white men did because where, the British came from, it wasn't a country with people of color as common. So the changes that happened in America didn't really do much because there wasn't many changes. The British Americans weren't open to the new cultures, weren't open to the new people that they were interacting with rather than, letting them in and taking their time to get to know their culture. They just kind of shot them down and tried to convert them, like in Native American children would be schooled by British Americans or in Britain to be better. So it wasn't so much about equality or freedom so much as it was about making sure that they had everyone in their grasp, had everyone underneath, their hand, had all of the moves. At the time, so British Americans would basically spend their time slaughtering Americans while speaking about freedom when they weren't giving what they were expecting back. At the time, British Americans really didn't do much for everyone in the country. I think the government was thinking more for itself, and the people who worked toward change didn't really see much change. If anything, the Declaration of Independence might have done more damage than if Great Britain came themselves and said, okay, stop, you're coming home, you're not moving out. Basically, the British colonies were runaway children and they needed to be brought back home. The blood spilled on the land of America was so much that it wasn't even just the Native Americans or the slaves, it was their own people that were dying. It was the things that were happening, the wars. The wars didn't go for much. It didn't go for as much change as it should have. People put their lives down. And of course, our country is amazing today. We have seen so many different changes since then. But the blood that was given at the time didn't really make any changes for the time. If the American Revolution is thought to be one of the most iconic moments in history, it sure didn't do much because there's more iconic movements in history that have been created, like Black Lives Matter or the feminist movement, the good sides of those. So the American Revolution created rights and created, don't get me wrong, the foundation of a country, but it was so close-minded that so much was done negatively toward other cultures, when if we just moved everyone forward at the same time, maybe it wouldn't have been such a bad period of time. Maybe the blood spilled on this land by, the slaughter or by the wars, doesn't matter which one, would have gone for something that actually meant something to America. Instead of wiping out cultures, we could mix them, or we could try to see where they're coming from. Instead of taking advantage of Native Americans, we could have adjusted to their way of life because their way of life was bound to nature. So overall, there could have been many changes that were made to the British Americans that they just simply neglected because they were used to their motherland. They were trying to mimic it, but mimicking the motherland wasn't exactly the positive thing at the time. With the knowledge they had toward the changes in America and things that were happening in North America, it could have definitely gone a lot different, and they could have definitely created an America that was stable and friendly and not at all slaughtering. I can agree that America definitely had a long, successful road to go down, and we're still going down it. But the American Revolution was simply not as impactful as people are putting forward. It was maybe impactful for the time, but still the amount of blood spilled, the amount of time spent trying to change people could have been spent just trying to put everyone together instead of making everyone so different. So yes, it can be argued that the American Revolution made a lot of changes, but it also can be argued that the American Revolution made changes for a very specific group of people and didn't really work with the Native Americans that actually mattered and the slaves that needed to be set free. Still, long after the American Revolution, after the Declaration of Independence, there was so much going on that could have been changed, that could have been paid attention to, and then we would be at a much further level than we are now. Recent events in America could go toward this, like the Black Lives Matter movement, the protesting, everything that's happening could be prevented, could have been prevented with the American Revolution changing everything and allowing there to be much diverse life in America instead of just the British Americans. But the government wanted control, and the only way to have control was to make sure that it was primarily their people living there, which is understandable because, when you have a friend group, you don't really have much say if you're outside your friend group. But so basically, while all of this was happening, the women sat back and looked pretty, and many of them were slaughtered because of the decisions made by the army. But overall, if there had been, the land of the free had been actually the land of the free, there would have been much, much more progress in America by now. So the Declaration of Independence, while a very pretty document, didn't do much for anyone else but British rich men who were politicians. So ending this video, the American Revolution didn't do much change at all. And I'll say that over and over again like I really have. And I think that it's apparent, and I think people know that it didn't make much change. And I hope that from now on, we keep making the changes that we have been making. Thank you.